Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tavach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it's in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Alevi Weinberg Olav Hashalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Hashalom, Rabbi Yael HaKohen Khan Olav Hashalom. It's also in schus and merit of Rabbi Zev Yecheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz Le'erich Yom B'Shanim Tevis for many long, healthy years. Before we go into the continuation of where we are up to in Tanya chapter 24, I should also mention, like I discussed last week, that we're coming from Yud Shevat. Earlier today, the Shabbos was Yud Shevat, the 75th anniversary of the Hiluli Stalkus of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the ascent and the beginning of the leadership of the Der Ashvi of his son-in-law, our Rebbe, 75 years ago. So it's worthwhile mentioning it, though we did elaborate more. I'll just say the following, that this is, of course, like the mission statement of our generation. As the Rebbe explained in the Maimer Basi Legani Tovshin Yud Aleph, that he delivered the following year, a year after the Tovshin Yud, that this is the seventh generation, like the generation of Moshe Rabbeinu, that brought the Shechina down, v'osel l'migdash v'shachanti b'seicham. So too our job is to bring the Shechina, this time permanently, in the Geula Amitis V'Ashlema. And indeed, the whole Basi Legani Maimer is around the theme of what is the purpose of creation. To take the shtus de l'umazeh, to take the folly and the insanity even of this world, of this material world, with all its corruption and duplicity and darkness, and turn it into shtus de kedusha. Shtus is also asay shittim, emdim. These are the key thing, the elements that with which the Mishkan was built, asay shittim. The cedar wood from which the Mishkan was built comes from the word shittim, comes from the word shtus. The kroshim, the beams that were built in the Mishkan, have the same letters as sheker, the falsity and the lies and the deception of this world, to be transformed into keresh, sheker, into keresh, kroshim. And we do that through the avodah of the Beis Hamikdash, avodah of the Mishkan, avodah harkarbonis, adam ki yakrim mekem korban laHashem. What is the meaning of that? That behema is the nefesh habamis. We offer our animal soul, and we refine and transform it to serve Hashem, like we say, v'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha, with both sides of the heart, the right side and the left side. The divine soul transforms the animal soul. In essence, this is the theme of Tanya. As he quotes it, the Tanya in the Maimer Basi Legani, the theme of Tanya, that we have a battle going on, and the goal is to transform the animal soul, and basically make from your life, from your very being, your physical being, and your chelke be'elam, the part of world, your corner of the world, to turn that into a mishkan le'yizbarach, a dira le'yizbarach. And as the prakim continue in the Hemshech, Basi Legani talks about the power that we have, the strength that we're given. Like the beginning of Tanya, Mashbi'in Eisei Tehit Tzadik V'alti Rosh. Mashbi'in doesn't just mean an oath, it also comes from the word V'savota, Masbi'ah, Masbi'in, that we're given the strength, we're empowered, we're sated, we're satiated, we're nourished with all the energy and resources we need to fight this battle. What he calls in the Basi Legani is the eitzes, the hidden resources, the hidden treasures that the king splurges, specifically when there's an enemy, when there's a war to be fought, when you're fighting the hell and the hester of this world, the darkness of this world. We don't just get resources. We get the most hidden resources, what he calls Erein Sof, not just Lamata Mata Aden Tachas, but Lamai Lamai Aden Ketz, which is concealed upon Helam Achar Helam, Ili Achar Ili, in the highest levels. which are actually the root of the concealment of this world in the first place. How could there be a shtuz de lumazeh? If Eined Milvade and God is omnipresent and omnipotent, how is it possible for it to be any thing that opposes godliness, that conceals godliness? And that's because God himself concealed the divine energy. It's called a tzimtzum. But it's not just a tzimtzum, it's a helam achar helam, mayla mayla adein ketz. And that is actually what's given to us, the root of it all that allows us to transform the helam below. Like menei be'aba lishde be'narga. To cut down the tree, you need the wood of the tree, the handle of the axe. The bottom line is the tremendous powers we have, especially in Ikvis of the Mashiach, the end of Golos. We're given the greatest strengths. Firstly, with the Gili of Primis HaTeirah, Teirah Achsidus, Tanya, and everything that follows, all the Teirah Achsidus that follows that, gives us the strengths to access the deepest levels, to be able to transform this world and finish the job of bringing the Gula Amitis Vashleim. Just a few words in the spirit of Yud Shevat. 75 years, of course, is a milestone. So the key thing is to take that lesson and apply it and actualize it. And with that, we actually learn Tanya for that reason. It's not just a theoretical discussion. It's all about bringing it into action. So indeed, these chapters are talking exactly about that. Say that even though we live in a dark world, and the divine is concealed, as he explained in chapters 20 and 21 and on, yet we're given Torah and mitzvahs, where there's no hester upon him, there's no concealment that allows us Torah, like explained in chapter 23, and mitzvahs, which are Ramach mitzvah sesa, the 248 positive mitzvahs corresponding to the 248 evarim de malka, which are one, like the limbs and organs of a body, kavyachal, the limbs and organs of the divine through mitzvahs. We unite and reveal the inherent connection that's there, even though they're ostensibly there's a concealment. And then in this chapter 24, he talks now the antithesis of mitzvah sesa, zel umazah mitzvah leisasa. So mitzvah sesa, the 248 mitzvah sesa, are all part of Anechi Hashem Elokecha, the revelation of divine unity, that every fiber of existence should be radiating and pulsating with the divine unity. And also the opposite is true, that there shouldn't be any fiber of existence that is devoid of the divine. And that's the 365 negative mitzvahs that are all encompassed in lo yilcha. There should be no other divine. There should be no other God except the divine God, I should say. Everything else is Avodah Zarah. And as he's explaining here, Avodah Zarah is not just the Isra of Avodah Zarah, actual idolatry, but anything that denies or in some way conceals the divine is a form of Avodah Zarah. And that's what the central theme of this Perek is that we've been learning. Like he said, being that they're neged, they're against, they oppose, and their mamish the opposite. So if the divine unity is like light, this is darkness, they're completely separate and severed from the divine unity, with utter separation. Like if life, oxygen, is flowing into your body, into your being, and that's chayenu ve'erech yamenu, that's your life and sustenance, this is the exact opposite. You're deprived. It's asphyxiation. That concealment, that's why they're called Sitra Achra, that's why they're called Avodah Zarah and Elakim Acherim, La Yilcha Elakim Acherim, because you're worshiping another God. You're replacing the oxygen, the very divine essence that sustains existence. You're replacing it with something of your own ego, your own self, or whatever it is that you're replacing God with something man-made, or yourself. And not just the Sitra Achra, but also the Gimel Chen, Gimel Levushay Nefesh Also the three garments, because there's two things here. There's the concealment of the world, and there's the acting on it. Remember, the world is a concealed state. Eilam Maloshin Halam V'Hasta, Tzimtzum, concealed it. But that doesn't mean we have to act in it. We have free will. That's what allows for free will. We have independent consciousness. But now the question is, what are you going to do? Adam and Chava are placed in Gan Eden. Yes, they're given free will. That means that there was something that was concealed. Because if there was complete Gili Alakus Mamish Ein Mulvade, even though Ikar Shechina B'Tachteni Meisei and all of that, but you have to say there was room for them to defy that. And you could say, because God said, don't eat from this tree, so that gave room for the possibility. It's also like a loyeh. Do not eat from it. And had they not eaten from it, they would have defied and said, the concealment, I will not be disturbed, I will not be distracted by the concealment. It won't distort my view because God is everywhere. That's what they had to choose. But for a moment they wandered away from that. They betrayed their own connection to the divine, what we call Anochi Hashem Elokecha. And they created an Elokim Acherim by doing the opposite of what Hashem wanted them to do. That was only possible because there was that tzimtzum and the helen. In Ein Sof Lifnei tzimtzum, you cannot have a chet tzadas. You can't have anything outside of godly omnipresence. That's the only consciousness there is. So the concealment allowed. And the same thing for us, maybe in a harder way, because once the chet tzadas, like we learn in Basi, that already the Shekhinah then became more concealed, and then generations afterward even more concealed, until Avram reversed the process and started bringing back Anochi Hashem Elokecha, using the language of Tanya and combining it with the themes of Basi, till Matan Torah, and then the building of the Mishkan, where Shechanti B'Seichem, back to the way it was Ikar Shechina B'Tachtenim, as it was by Basi in the beginning of creation, Lignuni. But it was only Lefisha, it was only temporary. Poska Zum Mosan Taka by Matan Torah, the toxins, the Zuma, the Tuma, the impurities of the Chet Tzadas that the Nachash introduced. And Adam and Chava, unfortunately, allowed to manifest. That returned, that Poska, that was paused by Matan Torah, but then Chazra with the Chet Egel. But how now we have the power of Matan Torah and we have the power of the Mishkan. However you explain the Mishkan, whether it's a tikkun for Chet Egel or not, but regardless, it all comes down to that's the Aveda. And Vasily Mikdash is a mitzvah that then applies to Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni and ultimately Bayis Shlishi. But our Aveda now is to correct all that. Now, not just are we contending with the concealment of the world, we also contend with the fact that we acted on it. And that's a critical piece that follows now. There's the concealment on its own. So God created a world that's concealed. Eilam Maloshin Halam V'Hasta, Bereshis Bara Elokim. And that's why there's a possibility. Tzimtzum allows for a possibility, because the Tzimtzum is not an end in itself. It's actually called Hepech HaRotzen, Hepech HaKavona. The Eibishter didn't want the concealment. The concealment is only B'Shvil HaGilui. And the Tzimtzum itself is actually another force of God's. Hein Hein Gvoresav. As he explains in Shayachid V'Amunah. And also part of the Hemshech Basi and the Rebbe's Maimorim on it, Tov Shechofei. This chapter 15 that we learned this year. So the intention is not concealment. It's like the teacher that conceals his intelligence in order to teach those students. The intention is that the students should understand and then grow to the point that he actually is able to access Lifnei Tzimtzum, the teacher as he was before he concealed, before he diminished. So concealment is a very intense one, but it's not the kavanah in itself. B'Shvil HaGilui. When we misunderstand that, that's when you have problems. So the very world is created by God. God wanted a world where the divine is concealed to some extent, depending what level. Ikar Shechina B'Tachteni may say it was obviously very revealed, but there was still room for Bechira. That a person wants to make a mistake, and Adam and Chava actually did. And then came the Chatoim afterwards. So there's the very concealment of existence, and the Klippus and Sitra Achra in the world. If you don't act on it, it's part of the world. The fact that there are things that conceal, that there's like the Shalosh says, that the klipa shemeres lepri, the fact that a fruit has a shell on it, the shell is a good thing. It's protecting the fruit. Shemeres. When is the problem? When you forget there's a fruit and you think the shell is an end in itself. Imagine the potato peels, the orange peel, the eggshell. The whole world, the material world, is an outer shell that's concealing the divine energy within it. That's the whole theme here that we're learning in these parakim. That's why there's Achdus Hashem that permeates all of existence, except the symptom doesn't let us see it. With our free will, recognizing that the concealment is only meant for us to be able to choose, so then we can reveal the fruit within, then we take Torah and mitzvahs. Torah, Reisa v'Kudsha B'Richu Kul Echad. We have the revealed divine. What does God want from us? And the very Torah we learn is Ritzeinu Shel Kodesh Baruch Hu Ritzeinu v'Chachmoseh, as we learned in the previous chapter 23. And mitzvahs which actualize it, that are Evorim de Malka. They are the actual manifestation of God's will. So that reverses the process where we don't act on the concealment, and we actually turn the world. We take the world that is manifest within, that's concealed in klippas nega. Shalosh klippas atmeis is off limits. And that's also part of the redemption, by avoiding it. Klippas nega, the things that you're allowed to do, you do it l'shem shamayim, like he explained earlier in chapter 6 and 7. And then what you do is you reveal the fruit within the shell, and then the klippas become material world, and all its layers are all there to protect the fruit. It's a means to an end. Just like the helam is a means to an end, the fruit is a means to an end, and that's up to us. So there's two things here. There's setting the stage, allowing for a person to have this choice, and then there's how we act. So this is how to help us understand the continuing flow of the chapter. That's what he says. So the first thing speaks about the Sitra Achar itself, the Klippa. That's called Avodah Zarah Elokim Acherim. Why? Because it is concealing. But then here's where the real problems begin, when you act on it. So then he says, Gimel Levusha HaNefesh HaMeklippus Negesh HaB'Yisrael. So also there's Klippas Negesh HaB'Yisrael, which is the Nefesh HaBamis, Shemachshava Dibra Maisa, that have thought, speech, and action. Now how are you going to use your thought, speech, and action? If it's going to be aligned to godliness, then you're focusing on the fruit and not on the shell. But if you're not, and you act on it, unfortunately, you do Ivran Aleisaseh or Isud Rabbanon, Hamuluboshim B'Shasa Leisaseh Daraisud Rabbanon. So now the thought, speech, and action which manifest within the Leisaseh, the things that a person shouldn't do, Daraisud Rabbanon, and not just the garments, the Mahus Nefesh Atzma, Hamulubeshes B'Levushah, the very core soul. Because remember, the garments are just expressions, they're just the instruments of the soul. The soul itself is the one that's active. So now when you're acting it, now that concealment is passing on to you. Till now, the world was that way, and you have a choice. You can either defy that concealment and reveal godliness through mitzvah sesa and through Torah, or, unfortunately, the opposite, and then you become an extension of the concealment. You become part of it. But v'lo yo'id, it gets worse than that. And of course, worse, I don't want to talk about negative things, but we have to understand the consequences of our behavior, and the Alter Rebbe lays it out in such graphic and lucid terms. V'lo yo'id, it's worse. Because the concealment of the world, that's the way God created it. That's the way it's meant to be. You cannot blame a klippah, a shell, for being a shell. The problem is how we understand it. If you say you had to ask the orange peel, why are you concealing the fruit? I'm not concealing, I'm protecting it. By you worshiping me, by thinking the shell is more important than money and materialism, and the physicality of the world is an end in itself, you're causing much more problems. I was never meant to do that. This is the dialogue between you and the klippah, so to speak. So this is that the person the person who's following and acting on the concealment, instead of finding the fruit within, is focusing on the material itself, on the klippa itself. You become subordinate to it. In other words, to what? To the physicality. Instead of appreciating what you should be appreciating, you're appreciating the wrong thing. You're completely distracted. Worse than distracted. The means is becoming an end, and the end, the fruit, is ignored. So he says, then ugruyim upchusim emena ma'od. Well, I should read the tone, the language a little different. He says, you're subordinate and you become its accessory, and they're really much worse and lower than the klippa itself. So two things. That the nefesh now is becoming, instead of focusing on the fruit, is becoming an accessory to the concealment. The concealment is now spreading into you. You become part of the problem. Till now, the problem was potentially there, and you could act either way. Now you become part of the problem, an extension of the problem. And even worse, and much worse than that. Now why? Because the klippa is beshes begufa chumri. It has no physical body. It's a spiritual entity. I don't mean the physical shell. Obviously, the physicality of the world, the food you eat, is physical. But the concealment part is a ruchnistic thing. And when you act on it, however, you're giving it physical body. You're actualizing that concealment. So the shell, think of a shell. Take a fruit, an orange. You peel the orange, you eat the fruit, great. But if you start worshiping the peel and you ignore the fruit, what are you doing? You're giving body now to the shell as an end in itself, because you're seeing it as an end in itself. You're becoming a vehicle of its expression. Additionally, he says, it continues, it doesn't have a body of its own. The klippa itself has a certain awareness. It knows why it was created. It may not be happy with it, because why should it deserve to be the power that conceals and can unfortunately seduce someone to behave the wrong way? But like we learn later, the mashal of the king hiring someone to try to seduce his son to test, and it's not what the Yetzer Hara wants. So the klippa itself, Yudeis es Rabbeinu ve'eino meredes bo. It knows its master and doesn't rebel against it. Lifel pilosa b'mishlachas malachi roim shalah. To do the job of sending out negative agents without being told to do so by God, God forbid. He's using an expression from Tehillim 78:49, Ayin Ches Mem Tes. But this itself, even when it's challenging us, because that is challenging. You look at the shell, and it's very, very seductive and very attractive, and draws us in. But it's doing that because it's the shlichus of Hashem. Like we see by Bilam. What did Bilam say? V'kamaymer Bilam, loy ucha lavet es pi Hashem. Even though Bilam was being hired by Balak to curse the Jews, but he knew, and he himself would have wanted to, and he was that agent. He says, I cannot transgress the word of God. This is the clip. This is the clip. But when you act on it, and you give it body, then what you're doing far worse than the clip itself. The clip was meant to do this. It was meant to conceal. But now comes the question, if it's meant to conceal, asked Alter Rebbe, so then why do we call it Avodah Zarah? Avodah Zarah should only be when you serve it, when you worship it. It itself is not Avodah Zarah, seemingly. So the Alter Rebbe bavorns that in the next sentence. It says, "V'af shenikra Avodah Zarah," even though it's called idolatry. And why is that idolatry? Because it's concealing the divine. But here's the distinction. Hakorole elakad elakaya. We know that even these negative forces do not deny there's a God. And he's talking here in general terms. There are exceptions, which we'll discuss. They don't deny a God. They korele elakad elakaya. Even the idol worshippers, they call God, God of gods. In other words, they have a God that's the God of materialism or the God of the shell, let's call it. But there's a God of gods. It's a Gemara in Menachos, Kuf Yud Amud Aleph, 110a. Ve'enim yechem laver klal al Hussein Yisbarach. And they're totally unable to transgress God's will. Ki yedim u'masigim shehu chayusam v'kiyumam. Because they know and understand that He is their life, energy, and sustenance. They know exactly that's what they were created for. And deeper, they know also that the kavanah was that people shouldn't act on it. But that's how they were created. And it goes on to explain the process of how they were created, that they can be in a way, on one hand, they conceal, but on the other hand, they know the purpose of their concealment, in a sense. I know the word purpose is the right, but they definitely cannot defy God. It's only the human being that comes into that scenario that can take it. And that's why we're going to learn that the person is worse than the klipa itself. But we'll stop here. And the kavanah is always, b'saim b'teiv, the kavanah, of course, is for us not to give in. And when you don't give in, you do something tremendous, because you have taken the concealment of Elokus, and you recognize its real purpose, and said, no, I will not be deceived by it, and I will reveal the divine. And with that, we bring Gula Pratis and Gula Klolis. So we'll stop here. Gute Woche. Maybe we mamshich the keiches of Yud Shevat, 75 years into the week, into the year. And Yifutze meine Sache Chutza will bring Osei Marda Malka Mashiach. TanyaApplied.com is this program, and you can check out all the episodes there.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.